Welcome back to Steel and Vance. It is time to dig in on a very heady subject, but one that we all as Canadians need to be paying attention to. Foreign interference in our elections and so much more.
Yeah, because we had the Conservative MP, Michael Chong, actually testified before Congress this week about his experiences.
What happened with me is that in May of this year, while a big debate was going on in Canada about foreign interference, a number of narratives, false narratives about me popped up on Chinese language social media.
It's just a big twisted rabbit hole with all kinds of
tentacles.
Yeah,
pathways.
Nasty things going on. And there was a lot of push for a national inquiry. And the Trudeau government was resisting, and the former Governor General said, well, I don't think we need one. Anyway, we're going to finally get one. They just announced that a Quebec judge is going to be listening to all of the evidence. But the question is, I don't know, are we going to really get the answers that I think Canadians deserve?
Good question. A question that maybe we pose to our next guest, who is Sam Cooper, investigative journalist. You've seen him on the program before. Sam is constantly breaking stories on this file. And Sam, we got to get you in here and talk through what we've learned to this point and what we might unearth in an inquiry now that we know there will be one. Thanks again for doing this.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, do you think we're going to get to the truth with this public inquiry?
Well, it's a positive step that we have a judge, an independent authority, looking at the evidence. At the outset, there are some concerns that the framing of the inquiry may be a little bit too narrow in a way and a little bit too wide in another. So what I'm talking about is that we know that the judge will be looking at allegations of election interference in 2019 and 2021. Those stemmed, many of them, from my reporting and documentation I found, as well as the Globe and Mail. But the problem here could be that the judge will only have access to documents that the former special rapporteur, David Johnston, had. And really, the problem and the file is so much broader than that. As you heard from MP Chan, after the 2021 election this year, he was targeted on WeChat. As I've reported, politicians across Canada that are seen as foes or critics of Beijing's interests are attacked very broadly on WeChat. In fact, in Chinese language media broadly. So my concern would be that the judge won't have access to information to let the inquiry go where it needs to go. And where it needs to go is that China is using something called the United Front Work Department to run operations in Canada, essentially supporting the politicians it wants to speak for Beijing in our governments and attacking the politicians that it doesn't like, meanwhile trying to control Canada's large Chinese diaspora. This is almost 5% of our population. And hey, means of control include these so-called Chinese police stations. And guys, I can tell you that if you understand who's running these police stations, that is Chinese police intelligence, and I'm saying in Canada, organized crime agents, that's how bad this gets. And if the judge doesn't look at that evidence, we have a problem.
Can you explain that a little bit further, just for the layperson to understand? There are actual police stations that are Chinese operated, actively working against our government. In what ways? What does that look like?
What it looks like is we have real physical buildings where China claimed to be running sort of services for what it calls overseas Chinese residents that still have connections to the mainland. But really what it was doing was implanting police agents from security bureaus across China, and also secretly having its proxies or agents in Canada. These would be people friendly to the regime in Beijing, many with business interests in China, but many with darker connections into the underground in Canada. These types of agents would be really secretly implanted within communities to intimidate could be dissidents or critics of China. And I reported That is, I testified in Parliament following many of my reports this spring that this can include agents of Beijing following and intimidating Canadian politicians. Those are the allegations. So we're talking about an authoritarian regime with a deep footprint into our communities. That's scary stuff.
And they're not fooling around, because after that testimony, you became a target.
What I can share with you is that days after my testimony, I was contacted by a national security unit that all I can share is I was informed of concerning information, and that because of my reporting on China, I needed to take some precautions. And look, I have taken precautions. I have a good support network around me. But I think that shows your viewers, look, if Canadian reporters could face threats for uncovering a foreign government's activity on our soil, look, this is a real problem and it needs to be solved.
Yeah.
And we got to talk about Brad West, too. Mayor Port Coquitlam, very outspoken about Chinese interference, influence, Beijing, and what isn't being addressed by leaders in Canada right now.
Yeah, it's amazing, Jody, how you made that connection. Again, this shows, as I reported, that if you are seen as a critic or an outspoken perhaps obstacle to Beijing's objectives, whether you're a reporter, a politician, a business leader, you will be very directly come into the sights of Beijing's agents in Canadian cities. And so as I reported, Brad West came forward to disclose to me that he had had meetings with CSIS in which he was informed, because he had been such a loud opponent of these meetings that occurred in Vancouver between municipal politicians and Chinese consulate officials, because he wanted that to stop. And he also strongly protested the detention of the Michaels in 2019. CSIS told him that Beijing was getting very worried about his activities and didn't want him to rise any higher in Canadian government, because he would provide a real threat to their objectives in Canada. So that's one thing. I reported that, but the other half of the story is that West also said his friends in the Chinese Canadian community came forward to him ahead of the 2022 municipal elections and explained that they had found evidence on this WeChat platform that some of these Beijing-friendly community leaders had got together to try to run a candidate against West in Port Coquitlam. They didn't succeed in doing that, but it just shows, as Brad West said, that he's a municipal politician, but he's facing the very same essentially attacks and smears that politicians such as former Conservative Kenny Chiu did on WeChat. As we've heard, MP Michael Chan on WeChat, Jenny Kwan, the NDP politician. So again, scary stuff. If you're a Canadian politician standing up for the rights of Canadians and you get in Beijing's way, they want you out of office. And again, will the judge get to the bottom of those kind of allegations, and who are the suspects behind those attacks? As the inquiry is framed right now, I just don't see it.
And, you know, as I mentioned earlier, it's a bit of a rat's nest, and the long arm of Beijing also sort of reaches out to the BC legislature, and apparently someone has Premier Eby's ear.
Well, I have been working on investigations. I think that the point of my work is to show that this isn't just about a few Chinese intelligence so-called diplomats, but really operatives in Toronto that interfered in the 2019 and 2021 election. This is about how China uses community leaders in Vancouver, Toronto, Montreal, Calgary also, that are taking directions from consulates, and tries to use these community leaders, or perhaps even media figures, to get next to our politicians. I will be looking more closely at BC's political landscape. But I do have concerns, and others have also, reported snippets about it, that Premier Eby does media advisor who is very close to state Chinese media. And guys, that really ties into another story that I did about how China's election interference involves really a total level of control, unfortunately, over Chinese language media. In fact, as I showed in my story, documents say that in 2015, the consulate in Vancouver came up with a master strategy to influence certain unnamed British Columbia TV stations to get close to top level managers. And by doing that, really trying to cultivate high level journalists to tell China's story well, quote unquote. And my concern is some of these media figures are very close to politicians, Premier Eby unfortunately being one.
It feels like we're always playing catch up on this file, Sam. You're breaking these stories in rapid succession, and here we are learning, and it always feels like we're not just months behind, but years behind.
I think you're exactly right. You know, I can tell you that, as you know, I received in meetings over the past few years documents, information from sources within Canadian institutions that are just so concerned about the fact that we do face this broad, let's just call it what it is, an attack on our democracy. But our leaders in Ottawa, most notably our Prime Minister and his office, haven't acted towards these concerns. And it does get, as one of my sources that I met with years ago told me, after my run of stories recently, Canadians still don't know the half of this. There are people in government that don't want you to report, but there are people in government that want you to keep going. So that's what we're doing here.
Hey, just 30 seconds before we let you go. I know a lot of people are concerned about the economy and their rent and you know, buying groceries, and they might think, politics are dirty anyway. Why should I be concerned about this? What would you say to them?
I'd say I think Michael Sean made the arguments very well in Washington. We are a free and democratic country. We are a middle power, if not a world power. We're important to the direction of this world in Canada. We have all the qualities of a leading nation, but if we allow a foreign power to threaten millions of our citizens, really, by trying to control diaspora groups and use them against our political leaders, essentially. Look, Canada is failing. So why it matters is we have a democracy to protect. We're a great country, and we can't let citizens and politicians be attacked on our own soil because they are standing up for those values.
Hell yeah!
Oh, no
Amen.
kidding.
Sam Cooper, his online investigative website is called The Bureau. Sign up for it. It's well worth reading because we're hearing stuff that we do not hear often in the mainstream media. So Sam Cooper, thank you for keeping up the good fight.
Thanks so much. I look forward to talk to you again.
Yeah.
Anytime you have an open...
That's like just like...
I worry about Sam.
I am worried about him
Sam.
too. I figure we were kind of joking, saying if we don't hear back from Sam the next time we email, I'm going to be concerned that somebody's grabbed a burlap sack over his head, because that kind of stuff could happen. Right?
This is scary. This is not a movie, and this is not a drill. Okay.
No. Yeah.
So we're going to move on. We will have Sam back for sure as more breaking stories happen at the Bureau. Again, stay tuned. Coming up, yet another driver speeding story that will have you screaming, what the hell is wrong with people?
Right. And up next, we're talking about a very serious pet peeve of mine anyway.
And mine too.
People who insist on having loud conversations on their speakerphone in public. Seriously, shut up. That's next.